They called him the Abomination, not because of his supernatural strength, but because of his weakness, a single malformed leg. 30 years ago, the High Council feared the omen more than they valued the miracle. Therefore they sealed his fate. They stripped the newborn child of his birthright, abandoned him in the cursed evil forest, and told the people the curse was lifted. Now their crops are ash, their rivers are dust, and the prophecy they ignored has come due. Only the rejected child, the one-legged monster they feared, can bring the rain. But that child is now the Night King, ruler of the wild, and the kingdom must crawl to the feet of the monster they created.
Welcome to Moonlit Passions, where love, power, and destiny collide. If you're ready to dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I've got more heart-pounding stories coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's begin.
Part 1. The Way to Purity 30 years ago. The Alpha's Flaw. The royal Alpha King Theron stood rigid in the opulent birthing chamber, the gold leaf carvings mocking the tension in the room. This was not a moment for tender emotion. This was a moment of succession, the transfer of ancestral power. Theron had waited a brutal decade for this heir, a true alpha who would cement his dynasty and silence the whispers that his bloodline was thinning due to his inability to secure a healthy male line. The chamber air was thick and volatile, crackling with primal energy and the acrid smell of burning wolfsbane used in protective rituals. The Queen's healers, led by the anxious Chief Elder Forlag, chanted ancient protection spells, their voices monotonous against the Queen's strained gasps. Outside the chamber doors, the entire palace held its collective breath. Courtiers pressed against the ornate corridors, straining to hear the first cry. The kingdom's future hung in the balance of this single birth. The instant the child emerged, a raw, blinding silver light, the unmistakable signature of prophetic power, exploded outward, stunning every wolf, from the lowest healer to the king himself, into instinctive, submissive paralysis. This was power beyond measure. The light burned so intensely that several healers shielded their eyes, tears streaming down their faces from the overwhelming brilliance. The ancient tapestries on the walls seemed to ripple and dance in the supernatural glow, and for a brief, eternal moment, every wolf in the chamber felt the crushing weight of destiny pressing down upon them. The prophecy is fulfilled. King Theron roared, tears of relief and triumph momentarily blinding him to all else. The true Alpha is born. Let the bells ring out across Aridia. His voice cracked with emotion. 10 years of desperate hope, of failed pregnancies, of whispered doubts about virility and the strength of his line. All of it dissolved in this single, perfect moment. He reached forward with trembling hands, ready to embrace the heir he had prayed for every night beneath the full moon. But the moment of celebration was instantly suffocated by a single, terrifying, collective gasp from the High Council. The sound was dry, sharp, and final. As the child was cleaned and presented for the Alpha King's inspection, the silver light receded, and the devastating flaw became horribly apparent. The infant was perfect, a beacon of vitality, with eyes of impossible, ancient gold and a powerful, healthy torso. His chest rose and fell with vigorous breaths. His tiny fists clenched with alpha strength that could already crack bone. His features were noble, bearing the unmistakable stamp of the royal bloodline. But where his left leg should have been, there was nothing but a smooth, clean closure, the mark of the crooked limb. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the Queen's labored breathing seemed to cease. The ceremonial candles flickered as if a cold wind had swept through the sealed chamber. The judgment of Forlag, Chief Elder Forlag, the keeper of the sacred laws and the king's oldest, most rigid advisor, was the first to move. His face, usually ruddy with the arrogance of tradition, was the color of parchment. He shuffled closer, peering down at the child's small body as if it were a poisonous snake. "An abomination," he whispered, the word cold and sterile, yet spreading like venom to the royal guard. "The power is undeniable, but the flaw is deeper. The moon goddess does not create imperfection unless she intends a curse. This is not a blessing. It is a mockery meant to dismantle our order." Forlag's hands trembled as he clutched his ceremonial staff. In his 70 years serving the crown, he had never witnessed such a contradiction. Prophetic power wrapped in physical imperfection. The ancient text spoke of such omens, but always in the abstract, and the cautionary tales meant to frighten young wolves into obedience. "The Codex of Luna is clear," Forlag continued, his voice gaining strength as he retreated into the safety of tradition. "A ruler must be whole in body, to be whole in spirit. The pack follows strength, not pity. An alpha who cannot run with his wolves cannot lead them into battle. This child, powerful though he may be, will invite challengers from every territory. They will see weakness and they will strike." The other members of the council, Lord Fenris, Duke Orin, and Lady Saria, quickly echoed the fear. Their eyes were not on the child's missing limb, but on each other, calculating the inevitable political fallout. An alpha could not be seen as incomplete. In the perpetual knife-edge political war between the wolf packs, weakness was not just a failing. It was a death sentence for the entire kingdom. Lord Fenris, whose northern territories bordered the hostile Shadowfang pack, spoke with barely concealed panic. "The Shadowfangs have been testing our borders for years, waiting for any sign of vulnerability. If they learn our heir is crippled, they will attack before the snow melts. We will lose half the kingdom before this child learns to walk." Duke Orin, the treasurer and pragmatist, added his cold calculation. "The economic impact alone will be catastrophic. Trade agreements depend on the perception of our strength. No merchant caravan will risk the northern routes if they believe we cannot protect them. Our allies will abandon us. Our enemies will circle like vultures." Lady Saria, the only female on the council and the most politically cunning, spoke last. Her voice was soft, almost sympathetic, which made her words all the more devastating. "Your Majesty, we all prayed for this child. We all celebrated the prophecy. But the prophecy spoke of a true alpha who would unite the packs and bring an age of prosperity. How can he unite the packs if they refuse to follow him? How can he bring prosperity if his very existence triggers civil war?" The Queen's despair and Alpha Theron's panic. Queen Isolde, despite the exhaustion and pain of the marathon birth, found a sudden, desperate strength. She reached for her son, her maternal instinct raging against the court's paralyzing judgment. "He is whole. He is strong. He is the prophecy," she pleaded, ignoring the blood and sweat that slicked her brow. "His power is proof. We will teach him. We will adapt. But do not turn away from the miracle we prayed for." Her voice rose to a desperate scream, echoing off the chamber walls. "Do you not feel his strength? Do you not see the light that emanated from him? That was the moon goddess herself blessing this child. Who are we to question her design?" She tried to sit up, to pull the baby to her chest, but her body betrayed her. The birth had taken everything. She was pale, trembling, barely able to lift her arms. The healers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to assist their queen or obey the silent command in the king's hardening expression. King Theron, however, was already lost to panic. His vision of secure dynasty had curdled into horror. He stared at the child as if looking into a distorted mirror of his own insecurities. In that tiny, imperfect body, he saw every whispered doubt, every veiled insult, every challenge to his authority made manifest. A crippled alpha is a weak kingdom, Theron repeated, his voice dangerously low, stripped of its former triumph. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, his alpha composure cracking like brittle ice. This child will incite immediate civil war. Rivals will see this flaw, this invitation, and challenge the throne before the boy is old enough to even shift. Therefore, he cannot be allowed to live within these walls. He paced the chamber like a caged animal, his mind spiraling through every political scenario, every possible future. In each vision, he saw the same outcome: armies at his gates, his kingdom torn apart, his line extinguished. The child's power meant nothing if the other pacts refused to recognize him. Power without legitimacy was just a target. The council unanimously upheld the ancient code of purity, a law etched into the very foundations of the palace. A child bearing the prophetic mark, but suffering a crippling flaw, must be given back to the earth to purge the kingdom of its curse. The vote was swift, almost mechanical. Each council member struck their staff against marble floor in turn, the sound of doom falling like hammer blows. No, Theron, you swore on your alpha honor you would protect our child. Isolde screamed, tears finally breaking through her resolve. She tried frantically to rise, to physically interpose herself, but the healers, their loyalty to the crown and the code absolute, held her down, their grip like iron manacles. He is your blood. He is your salvation. You will regret this for eternity. Her screams grew more desperate, more animalistic. She thrashed against the healer's hold, her nails drawing blood from their arms. But they did not relent. Forlag had given them a direct command with his eyes. The queen must be restrained for her own protection. Look at him. Isolde sobbed, her voice breaking. Look at your son. He has your eyes, Theron. He has your strength. You're condemning him for something beyond his control. But Theron had already sealed the contract with his fear. He snatched the infant from the healer's arms with movements too rough, too angry. The small body, sensing the sudden, brutal rejection, let out a raw, heart-wrenching, purely human cry of fear that silenced all debate. It was not the strong cry of an alpha pup, but the terrified wail of an abandoned child. I am saving this kingdom from itself, Theron declared, his voice hard as iron, his gaze fixed on a distant point, deliberately avoiding the child's impossibly gold eyes. I am protecting the integrity of the alpha line. Therefore, this must be done, and I will bear the sin alone. The last words were a lie. He would not bear it alone. He would force Isolde to bear it, to live with it, to wake every morning knowing her son was dead because her husband lacked the courage to defend him. The betrayal walk. He wrapped the crying infant roughly in the royal coronation shroud, a white silk cloak meant for his crowning, and strode out of the chamber. Isolde's frantic, broken scream followed him, a sound that etched itself into the very stone of the palace walls. It was the last human sound the child ever heard within the palace walls. The guards outside the chamber door stood at attention, their faces carefully blank, but Theron saw the judgment in their eyes. They knew, they all knew, by morning, every wolf in the kingdom would know that King Theron had murdered his own heir to preserve his power. Theron walked for miles through the sleeping, unaware city, out beyond the cultivated fields, the silence of the night heavy with his terrible decision. His wolf instinct screamed at him to stop, to protect his own, but the king in him, the man driven by legacy and fear, marched on. His footsteps were heavy, mechanical, each one taking him further from humanity and deeper into the cold pragmatism of political survival. The moon was full and merciless overhead, illuminating his path with silver light that felt like accusation. Theron wanted to howl, to rage against the cruelty of fate, but he maintained his cold silence. If he allowed himself to feel, he would turn back. He had to complete this task before his resolve broke entirely. He reached the boundary of the evil forest, a place of exile where the condemned were left to the wild beasts, the unpredictable weather, and the madness of forgotten magic. The forest had stood since before the first wolves walked upright. It was older than the kingdom, older than the moon goddess's covenant with their kind. Wolves who entered the evil forest did not return. It was a place of endings. He pushed into the dense undergrowth, the air growing instantly colder, thicker, smelling of rot and ancient power. The trees here were twisted, their branches reaching toward each other like skeletal fingers, blocking out the moon's light. The forest floor was soft with centuries of decay, and Theron's boots sank into moss with each step, as if the earth itself was trying to pull him down. He found the deepest, darkest point, where the pines formed a cathedral of shadow, blocking out the light of the benevolent moon goddess. He laid the child gently on the damp, cold moss, his hands trembling for the first time. The child stopped crying instantly and stared up at his father with those ancient, gold eyes, not with fear, but with a devastating, primal understanding. In that moment, Theron felt the full weight of his decision. His son knew, even at mere hours old, the prophetic child understood betrayal. "May the earth take your burden, little one," Theron whispered, his voice catching in his throat. He placed a cold, ceremonial dagger, the one meant to induct the heir into the royal line, beside the shroud. It was a final, grim mercy for a quick, painless end, should the child have the consciousness to use it. A clean death was better than being torn apart by wolves or dying slowly from exposure. Therefore, King Theron turned his back on his son, on his wife, and on the future's line, leaving the ultimate alpha to the mercy of the dark. He walked back toward the kingdom, his shoulders hunched, his alpha pride shattered. The clock of the kingdom's doom began to tick. Behind him, the child did not cry. The forest was silent, and somewhere in the darkness, ancient powers stirred, recognizing the arrival of something extraordinary. Part 2. The Forge of the Night King the First Year. The primal education, therefore. The child did not die quickly. The dense, wild magic of the forest, recognizing the raw, prophetic power flowing through the infant's veins, did not consume the child, but instead wrapped around like an uneasy shroud. The ceremonial dagger was found weeks later by a wandering beast, untouched, its silver blade tarnished by ancient elemental magic, a sign that the forest had rejected the king's death sentence. The forest itself seemed to breathe differently around the abandoned child. The moss that cushioned his small body grew thicker, forming a protective nest. The trees bent their lower branches to shield him from the worst of the rain and cold. It was not kindness. The forest had no concept of mercy, but recognition. Power called to power, and the ancient magic that saturated every root and stone of the evil forest recognized a kinder force. The infant was not nurtured by gentle hands, but molded by brutal necessity. He survived on condensed moisture trapped in the moss and the occasional blind instinct of a frightened animal that would wander too close, drawn by the child's otherworldly aura. A doe, confused and compelled by forces she couldn't understand, would stand frozen while the infant nursed. A raven would drop berries it had gathered. The forest provided, but it extracted a price, the child's humanity. Therefore, by the end of the first year, his physical development was stunted compared to the pampered royal pups of Aridia, but his mind was preternaturally focused, already more wild animal than human. He learned to read the forest's moods by the way the wind shifted. He understood danger by the silence of birds. He knew hunger as a constant companion, a howling void that drove every decision. When he finally learned to crawl, the missing leg became the central, agonizing source of his primal, focused rage. He was forced to drag his torso, relying entirely on his massive upper body strength and his 3 powerful limbs to haul himself over roots and rocks. The first attempts left his palms bloody, his chest scraped raw against the rough ground. But pain was irrelevant. Movement meant survival. But this very struggle, this constant, violent exertion, imbued his remaining muscles and bones with unnatural, diamond-hard power. His arms grew thick with corded muscle. His shoulders broadened until they were twice the width of a normal child his age. His remaining leg became a pillar of pure strength, capable of launching his body forward with explosive force. He was physically flawed, therefore he was physically unstoppable. The transformation from child to alpha by his 5th year. Though he appeared closer to 15 due to his accelerated growth, the boy had his first successful shift. The transformation was agony beyond description. His bones cracked and reformed. His skin tore and regrew, and for 3 full days he writhed in the hollow of an ancient oak, his screams echoing to the forest and sending every creature fleeing in terror. When he emerged, he was a wolf unlike any the forest had ever seen. His coat was midnight black, so dark it seemed to absorb light. His eyes burned with that same prophetic gold, visible even in the deepest shadow. He was massive, standing shoulder to shoulder with the largest dire wolves that roamed the forest's heart. But his gait was pronounced, his left hindquarter dragging slightly with each step. The other wolves, the rogues, the ferals, the mad ones who had fled civilization, smelled his alpha power and came to challenge him. They saw the limp and assumed weakness. They were wrong. The first challenger was a scarred brute named Bloodfawn, a rogue who had killed his own pack and ruled a section of the northern forest through terror. He attacked with confidence, expecting an easy victory. The young alpha waited perfectly still until Bloodfawn committed to his lunge. Then he moved. His missing leg gave him a unique, shifting center of gravity that made his movements unpredictable. He pivoted on his single hindquarter, using his massive forelegs to redirect Bloodfang's momentum. The rogue wolf crashed into a tree with bone-shattering force. Before he could recover, the young alpha was upon him, jaws locked around his throat, applying pressure with terrifying precision. He didn't kill Bloodfawn immediately. He held him there, letting the rogue feel death's proximity, letting him understand the vast gulf in their power. Only when Bloodfawn went completely limp in submission did the young alpha release him. The message was clear: serve or die. The rise of the 3-legged shadow. As the boy grew, aging at a supernaturally accelerated rate due to the power he contained, his wolf shifts became more controlled, more deliberate. When he became fully wolf, he was instantly massive, powerful, radiating alpha energy that could force submission from any wolf within 100 yards. His presence was a weight on the mind, a pressure on the spirit. He learned to hunt and to fight, not by the civilized alpha rules of dominance ritual, but by the predator rules of cunning, silence, and absolute terminal survival. His missing limb gave him a unique, shifting center of gravity, allowing him to dodge and strike in ways his 4-legged counterparts could not anticipate. Where they expected him to pivot right, he collapsed left. Where they anticipated a straight charge, he spiraled in from an impossible angle. He defeated the larger, 4-legged rogue wolves of the forest, wolves that had gone mad years ago, using their own savage rage against them. He learned to read their attacks before they made them, to see the subtle shift of weight, the fractional tensing of muscle that preceded every strike. Therefore, his victories were always brutal and absolute, but never wasteful. He killed only when necessary, preferring to break spirits rather than bodies. The spirits, the ancient fae, and the rogue packs of the Forbidden Forest began to submit. They saw the golden eyes, the immense shadow he cast, and the terrifying, cold intelligence behind his movements. He owed them nothing, but demanded everything. He forced the Pharaoh packs into a rigid, terrified hierarchy, organizing the chaos of the evil forest into something resembling civilization. He established his dominion not with tradition or ceremony, but with terror and undeniable strength. He found a massive, petrified tree stump, splintered by lightning centuries ago, and carved his own throne from its ancient wood. He draped the few remaining, tattered strips of his royal coronation shroud over it, a reminder of the power and the title he was denied. Around the throne, he built a court of monsters. The most vicious rogues became his generals. The ancient fae spirits, who had remained hidden from the mortal world for generations, emerged to offer their allegiance. He was no longer the Abomination. He was a Night King, the ruler of all the kingdom rejected. Therefore the evil forest became his impenetrable, sovereign domain, a kingdom carved from spite and absolute power. The Queen's silent grief. Back in Aridia, Queen's soul withered from the inside out. Her face remained composed for court, her posture regal during ceremonies, but her spirit was a silent tomb. She performed her duties with mechanical precision, greeting dignitaries, attending council sessions, hosting feasts, but everyone could see that the light had gone from her eyes. Theron, rigid in his conviction that he had saved the kingdom, refused to speak of the child. The subject was forbidden in the palace. Servants who whispered about the lost prince were dismissed. Courtiers who asked questions were banished. But the silence didn't erase the memory. It amplified it. The ghost of the child haunted every corridor, every decision, every moment of Theron's reign. The act had poisoned Theron's soul and his marriage. He and his soul no longer shared chambers. They barely spoke except in formal settings. When they did interact, Isolde's eyes carried an accusation sharper than any blade. She never forgave him. She couldn't. Her love had died in that birthing chamber, murdered by his cowardice. Isolde's waking life was dominated by duty. Her sleeping life was dominated by visions of a small, one-legged wolf running through the forest, always just out of reach. She spent 30 years paying witches, bribing desperate travelers, and risking her life on silent patrols along the forest boundary, all in vain, to bring her one piece of proof that her son had survived. She collected every rumor, every whispered tale of a massive black wolf in the evil forest. Hunters who returned from the boundaries spoke of golden eyes watching from the shadows. Travelers reported hearing a howl unlike any wolf they had known, deeper, more intelligent, carrying notes of rage and power that made their blood run cold. Isolde gathered these stories like precious gems, holding each one close to her heart as evidence that her son lived. She never prayed for his return as king, but she prayed for his vengeance against the man who had thrown him away. She needed the universe to confirm that Theron's terrible choice had a terrible cost. Therefore her long, silent grief was not passive. It was a slow, deliberate cultivation of her own bitter justice. In the darkest hours of night, Isolde would stand on her balcony, facing the distant shadow of the evil forest, and whisper to the wind, "Survive, my son. Grow strong. Come back. Make them all pay." Part 3. The king have asked the famine, but the prosperity that King Theron had sought to protect vanished 30 years later, not in a sudden blaze, but in a slow, agonizing decay. The rot began subtly, a decrease in the annual yield, a slight shift in winds. But 4 years ago, the sky darkened permanently, and the seasonal rain ceased entirely. At first, the royal advisors dismissed it as a temporary climate fluctuation. They assured the king that the rains would return with the next season. But the seasons changed, and the sky remained the same sickly gray color. The sun became harsh and unforgiving, burning the fields without mercy. The moon seemed dimmer, as if the goddess herself had turned her face away from Aridia. The famine arrived like a creeping, suffocating sickness. The soil cracked into painful, dusty geometry, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the earth itself was expressing its anger. The crops turned black and brittle under the unnatural, glaring sun, crumbling to ash at the slightest touch. Farmers wept in their fields, helpless against forces beyond their understanding. The once rushing rivers shrank to muddy, foul-smelling trickles. Fish died by the thousands, their rotting bodies creating a stench that hung over the kingdom like a pall. Wells dried up, springs ceased flowing, water became more valuable than gold, and people killed over a single clean cup. The Alpha Pack, dependent on abundant resources and the king's strength, began to starve. Their discipline dissolved, and they turned on each other over scraps of moldy grain. Wolves who had once sworn brotherhood fought savage duels over a single rabbit. The social order of the pack collapsed as survival instinct overrode loyalty. King Theron, now a ghost of an old man, was gaunt and hollow-eyed, his once magnificent frame reduced to skin and bone. His alpha power had diminished to a flicker, barely enough to command respect from his own guards. His once proud palace was choked with dust and despair, the golden halls tarnished and empty. He had protected the bloodline's purity, but he had nothing left to rule but ash and the skeletal remains of his people. The irony was not lost on anyone. In trying to secure his kingdom's future, he had destroyed it. The rebellion. The citizens rioted, their voices hoarse with hunger and rage. "We are cursed," they screamed, tearing down royal banners and setting fire to symbols of the crown. "The king has lost the favor of the moon. The blight is his majesty's fault." The protest started peacefully enough, desperate pleas for aid, for intervention, for some explanation of why their moon goddess had abandoned them. But as children starved and elders died, the peaceful protests turned violent. Mobs stormed the palace gates, demanding Theron's abdication. The king's guard, weakened by hunger and doubt, barely held them back. Some guards deserted their posts entirely, unwilling to defend a ruler who had clearly lost divine favor. Those who remained did so out of duty, not loyalty. Theron watched from his balcony as his kingdom tore itself apart. He saw mothers clutching skeletal children. He saw young wolves, barely old enough to shift, fighting over food scraps like animals. He saw the complete dissolution of everything he had tried to preserve. And in the darkest corner of his mind, a terrible truth whispered, "This is punishment. This is divine retribution for abandoning your son." The prophecy revealed, therefore. Chief Elder Forlag had died 2 years into the famine, his final, terrified words being only the repeated meaningless mantra. The flaw was a price. The flaw was the price. He had wasted away in his chambers, refusing food, driven mad by guilt and the growing certainty that he had interpreted the prophecy wrong. The council was in utter disarray, desperate for any answer. The new priestess, Lyra, was young, fierce, and possessed a quiet strength that ignored the outdated laws of the council. She had risen from obscurity during the famine, her healing abilities and prophetic visions marking her as touched by the moon goddess. Where the old priesthood had been complicit in the abandonment, Lyra represented a new generation, one willing to challenge the king himself. She risked her life, enduring 3 days of sensory deprivation and starvation in the cursed temple ruins at the edge of the evil forest. She drank only moon-blessed water and ate nothing, allowing her mind to slip between the mortal world and the realm of prophecy. When she returned, she was pale as death, her eyes haunted, but she carried a vision that shattered the last illusions of the court. The blight is not random. It is payment, she declared, her voice ringing with grim certainty amidst the despair of the throne room. The kingdom's heart is black with the memory of injustice. The moon goddess weeps for the child you threw away, and her tears will not fall until justice is served. But the one you threw away holds the key to the rain. The curse was never lifted. It was merely transferred to him, and he carries it still. She laid a new, glowing tablet on the king's dusty throne, a slab of ancient stone that had appeared in the temple during her vision, inscribed with burning letters that no one could touch without searing pain. The King of Ash will beg the Night King for rain. The rejected child shall hold the sun in his hand, but will give it only at the cost of the heart that rejected him. The throne room fell deathly silent. Every wolf present understood the implication. The prophecy had come full circle. The child they had abandoned was their only salvation. The meaning was devastatingly clear. The rejected son, the Abomination Alpha, was their only savior. Therefore, the king who threw him out had to go to him and pay a price that was measured in agony, not gold. The emissary and the king's shame. King Theron, broken and weeping openly now, could not even meet the gaze of the young priestess. He collapsed in his throne, his body shaking with sobs that echoed through the empty hall. He was too weak, too ashamed to face the monster he had created. "I cannot," he whispered, clutching the broken armrest of his throne. "I cannot face those eyes again. I see them every night in my dreams, accusing me, condemning me. Therefore, the task falls to you, Lyra. You're the only one untouched by the ancient crime." Isolde, standing silently in the shadows of the throne room, stepped forward for the first time in years. Her voice was cold, devoid of all compassion. "Coward," she said simply. "You couldn't kill him with your own hands 30 years ago, so you let the forest do it. And now you can't even face the consequences of your decision. You are no king. You are a frightened child wearing a crown." Theron flinched as if struck. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words died in his throat. She was right. He had always been right. "Tell him what he needs to hear," Theron croaked, addressing Lyra and ignoring his wife's condemnation. "Tell him the crown is his. Tell him we were fools. Tell him I beg for his mercy. Just bring us the rain." Lyra spent a long night in preparation, gathering only her most sacred artifacts, a ceremonial cloak woven from moonlight and spider silk, a staff carved with hopeful runes by artisans long dead, and a deep, paralyzing sense of dread. She carried no weapons, but she carried the shame of her entire kingdom, a burden heavier than any armor. Therefore, her strength was purely her courage and her faith in a greater justice. She walked out of the crumbling city at dawn and approached the dark, dense line of the evil forest. It no longer smelled of madness and chaos, but of cold, absolute, and terrifying power. The air shifted as she approached. It became heavy, silent, and watchful. Every step she took was an act of penance for a sin she did not commit. The boundary between the kingdom and the forest was marked by bleached bones and warning totems. No one had entered the evil forest in 15 years. Those who tried never returned. Lyra crossed the boundary without hesitation. Behind her, the kingdom of Aridia held its collective breath, waiting for salvation or final judgment. Part 4. The Night King's Justice to Journey and the Clearing. Lyra walked for 5 grueling hours through the ancient, silent woods. The forest was hostile, but strangely ordered. The growth was impossibly dense, yet the ground underfoot was clear debris, as if someone or something maintained the paths. She saw massive wolf prints that dwarfed any alpha in Aridia, and every tree bore deep claw marks that glistened with dark sap, the borders of the Night King's territory. The deeper she traveled, the more unnatural the forest became. The trees here were ancient beyond reckoning, their trunks wider than buildings, their branches forming a canopy so dense that sunlight was reduced to pale, scattered fragments. The air was thick with power, making each breath feel heavy, significant. She heard the chilling sound of a high-pitched cry. She froze, clutching her staff, but realized it was not fear. It was worship. A pack of savage wolves, previously thought feral and mindless, were gathered around a pool of crystal-clear water, awaiting a massive, black-furred alpha who drank with a terrible, regal stillness. The Night King in wolf form was magnificent and terrifying. His coat was darker than shadow, and his eyes, those prophetic gold eyes, reflected the light like twin suns. When he drank, every wolf present lowered their heads in submission. When he raised his massive head and scented the air, catching Lyra's presence, every wolf turned as one to face her. She expected attack. She prepared for death. But the Night King merely huffed, a sound that might have been amusement, and turned away, leading his pack deeper into the forest. One wolf remained, a gray female with intelligent eyes, who gestured with her muzzle for Lyra to follow. She followed the path of carved authority, passing through territories that grew progressively more organized. She saw denning sites arranged in careful patterns. She saw prey animals that showed no fear, living in careful balance with their predators. The Night King had not conquered the forest through violence alone. He had civilized it. She reached a vast clearing dominated by a grotesque, dark throne carved from the blackest petrified wood. The throne stood on a raised platform of ancient stone, surrounded by cairns of bone that formed protective circle. The entire clearing hummed with power. The Night King was seated upon it. He was in human form now, though calling him human seemed insufficient. He was massive, his frame built from 30 years of brutal survival and supernatural power. His chest was bare, revealing a landscape of scars and muscle that seemed carved from marble. His hair was long, wild, and black as his wolf coat. But it was his face that held her, sharp, regal features that bore an unmistakable resemblance to King Theron, twisted by years of rage and isolation into something far more dangerous. And his eyes, those impossible gold eyes that had stared up at his father 30 years ago, now burned with cold, ancient intelligence and barely restrained fury. He was cloaked in shadowed fur that moved with its own slow wind, and across his lap lay the tattered remains of the white coronation shroud, now stained with earth and time. He was flanked by massive, subjugated wolves, beasts who looked terrified, but fiercely loyal to their superior alpha. When Lyra entered the clearing, every wolf turned to face her. The weight of their combined attention nearly drove her to her knees. The audience, but the Night King shifted, slowly and deliberately, standing to his full height. The movement was practiced, graceful despite the pronounced limp that marked each step. He descended from his throne with measured steps, and Lyra realized the limp was intentional, a deliberate, physical reminder of what had been done to him. He wore his flaw like a crown of vengeance. "You seek reign, little wolf?" the Night King asked, his voice a low, chilling melody, the sound of ancient power and bitter memory fused together. Each word carried weight, as if the air itself bent to accommodate his speech. "You are not the King of Ash. I expected a man of greater consequence, but I see he has sent a priestess to beg in his place. How appropriate. He sends a holy to cleanse his unholy sins." Lyra knelt instantly, bowing her head deeply, pressing her palms flat on the cold earth. The soil beneath her fingers vibrated with power. "My king," she began, using the title that was now his alone, and feeling the truth of it resonate through her bones. "My people are dying. The kingdom of Aridia begs for your mercy. We offer you the throne, the crown, and the sincere apology of the people. We acknowledge the terrible injustice done to you." The Night King laughed, a harsh, sharp sound without warmth, like splitting ice. The wolves around the clearing echoed his amusement with low, rumbling growls. "Mercy is for the weak, priestess, and I know the value of your apologies. They are the currency of convenience, offered when the alternative is annihilation. You offered a child to the wolves to save yourselves from perceived curse. But the curse was never the limb. The curse was your fear and your prejudice." He circled her slowly, his limp creating an uneven rhythm that was somehow more menacing than a normal stride. "Tell me, priestess, did your people weep for me? Did they light candles and pray for my soul? Or did they celebrate the lifting of the curse and sleep soundly knowing the abomination was gone?" Lyra kept her head bowed, her voice steady despite her fear. "The people were told you had died at birth, that the moon goddess had taken you back. They mourned an infant prince, not knowing the truth of your abandonment. Only the king and the high council knew what truly happened." "Ah, yes, the council." The Night King's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Forlag, Fenris, Orin, Saria, and of course my beloved father, King Theron, the architects of my childhood. Tell me, how they fare these days? Still fat and comfortable in their palace of lies?" "Forlag is dead," Lyra said quietly. "He died mad, consumed by guilt. The others remain, though they are shadows of their former selves. The famine has taken everything from us. We are a broken people, my king." "Good." The word was simple, final, carrying 30 years of accumulated hatred. "Let them know suffering. Let them taste despair. Let them understand what it means to be abandoned by those sworn to protect them. The demand, therefore." He stepped closer, his imposing shadow falling over her, filling the space with the crushing weight of his alpha power. It pressed down on her like a physical force, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. But Lyra held steady, meeting his gaze with the pure light of desperation, not defiance. "The throne is already mine," the Night King stated, his voice resonating with absolute authority. "I took it the moment I survived your abandonment. I claimed it when I conquered this forest and bent every feral beast to my will. I earned it through blood, pain, and 30 years of solitude. Therefore your offer is meaningless. You came to me because you have no other choice, and I will not be bought with trinkets and empty promises." He returned to his throne, settling into it with the ease of long practice, his gaze distant, remembering the cold moss, the silence, and the pain of betrayal. "Your father, the King of Ash, asked for salvation. Salvation has a price, and I am here to collect 30 years of interest." Lyra swallowed hard, her mouth dry with dust and dread. "Name your demand, Night King. We will pay any price. Land, gold, tribute, annual offerings, whatever you require, we will provide." The Night King slammed his fist down on the wooden throne, the impact echoing to the clearing like a gunshot. Birds erupted from the trees. Several younger wolves yelped in fear. "I want no gold. I want no tribute. I have no use for your corrupted land or your poison offerings. You traded one life for 30 years of false security. Therefore I demand balance. You wanted purity. You will pay with blood. He stood and pointed toward the city, visible as only a dark shadow on the distant horizon, a smudge of gray against the dying landscape. My demand is simple, priestess, but absolute. Listen carefully, for I will not repeat it. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. I want my mother, Queen Isolde, to deliver her apology in person, not for the crime of the kingdom, but for the crime of allowing me to be taken. She will come to me, unarmed and alone, and she will tell me why she failed to protect her own child. She will look into these eyes and explain how a mother's love could be so easily silenced. Lyra's breath caught. The request was deeply personal, more painful than any physical torture. And secondly, the Night King continued, his voice rising with controlled fury. I want the hearts of the High Council that condemn me, not metaphorically, not symbolically. I want their actual, still beating hearts torn from their chests and delivered to me. The king and the current chief elder, whoever replaced that coward forelag, they must be brought here, bound and kneeling, and delivered to me before the next full moon. He descended from his throne again, approaching Lyra until he stood directly before her. His presence was overwhelming, his power crackling in the air between them. You will bring me Lord Fenris, Duke Orin, and Lady Saria. They will come in chains. They will kneel before the throne they denied me, and they will beg for a mercy I will not give. Their blood will water this earth, and perhaps, the moon goddess will find their sacrifice acceptable. Lyra's voice trembled. And then the king? What of King Theron? The Night King's expression darkened, his gold eyes blazing with such intensity that Lyra had to look away. My father is a special case. He will not die quickly. He will not die cleanly. He will come to me, and he will live long enough to see everything he tried to protect turn to ash. He will watch his kingdom bow to the son he threw away. He will see his bloodline continue through me, the Abomination. And only when he has truly understood the magnitude of his failure will I grant him the mercy of death. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouts. Deliver the price of their betrayal, and the rain will fall. The crops will grow. Your people will survive. But refuse, and the famine will become the least of your worries. I will march on Aridia with every feral beast, every road pack, every forgotten nightmare that dwells in this forest. I will tear down your palace stone by stone. I will salt your fields. I will ensure that nothing grows in that cursed land for 1,000 years. His gold eyes bore into hers with terrible certainty. Go tell your king. The Abomination Alpha demands its payment, and the life of a coward is a poor substitute for my lost childhood. You have until the full moon, 30 days, one for each year I spent in this forest, abandoned and alone. He turned his back on her, a gesture of dismissal that was also an insult. Now leave my sight, little priestess, before I decide that one more sacrifice might speed the rain along. Lyra, unable to speak, her legs trembling with terror and relief, rose and fled. She ran through the organized forest, past the watching wolves, across the boundary back into the dying kingdom. Behind her, she heard the Night King's howl, a sound of triumph, rage, and terrible, inevitable justice. It echoed across the barren land, like a proclamation of doom. The victorious Night King remained alone with his power, his past, and his terrible justice, finally able to exact the price for 30 years of pain. Epilogue, the ultimate return. Lyra returned to the kingdom of Aridia 3 days later, not with hope, but with a death sentence wrapped in the promise of survival. She was gone, her eyes haunted by what she had seen. The journey back had been longer, each step heavier as she carried the weight of the Night King's demands. The throne room was packed when she arrived. Every noble, every remaining pack leader, every citizen strong enough to stand had come to hear the verdict. King Theron sat on his throne, looking smaller than ever, while Queen Isolde stood in the shadows, her face unreadable. Lyra's voice was steady as she delivered the Night King's terms, but with each word, the hope in the room died a little more. When she finished, the silence was absolute. "He wants us to deliver ourselves for execution," Duke Oren finally said, his voice shaking. "That's not negotiation. That's vengeance." "It's justice," Queen Isolde said quietly, stepping forward into the light for the first time in years. Every eye turned to her. "We condemned an innocent child to death for the crime of being born imperfect. Now the bill has come due. Did you expect mercy?" "Your Majesty," Lord Fenris began, but Isolde cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I will go," she declared. "I will face my son and deliver my apology. I have waited 30 years for this moment. I prayed he survived so that someone would finally hold us accountable." King Theron's head snapped up. "Isolde, no. You don't have to." "Don't I?" She turned on him with decades of suppressed fury. "I held my child for mere moments before you tore him from my arms. I screamed for you to stop, and you didn't even look back. Every day for 30 years, I have lived with that failure. If my son wants an explanation, he deserves one, and I will give it to him, even if it costs me my life." The council's choice. The High Council members looked at each other with varying degrees of terror and resignation. Lady Saria spoke first, her voice surprisingly calm. "The Night King is right. We chose political expediency over justice. We chose our own comfort over an innocent life. If our deaths can save the kingdom, then perhaps it's a debt worth paying." "You're mad," Lord Fenris snarled. "All of you. We walk into that forest. We're dead. There's no guarantee he'll honor his word. We'll be slaughtered for nothing. Then what do you propose?" Duke Oren asked tiredly. "We have 30 days. We can refuse and watch our people starve, or we can fight a war against the supernatural Alpha who commands the entire evil forest. Neither option ends well for us." Theron stood, his legs trembling. "I will not ask you to sacrifice yourselves. This is my sin. I made the choice. I will face him alone." "No!" came a voice from the crowd. It was Captain Aldrich, the head of the Royal Guard. "Your Majesty, with respect, you going alone accomplishes nothing. The Night King wants justice for the Council's decision. All of you must face him." The room erupted in arguments, accusations, and desperate attempts to find another solution. But as the hours wore on, the truth became unavoidable. There was no other way. The impossible decision. The Night King's demand is absolute. Justice was rejected, or the total destruction of the kingdom. King Theron now faces the ultimate moral dilemma, one that would define the final chapter of his reign and his life. Can a king sacrifice his own life and the lives of his remaining loyal advisors to save the very people he swore to protect? Is redemption possible for sins committed 3 decades ago, or is some betrayal too profound to ever be forgiven? The council must choose. Walk voluntarily into the Night King's domain and face certain death, or condemn millions of innocent citizens to starvation and suffering for crimes they didn't commit. Queen Isolde has already made her choice. She will face her son, not to beg for mercy, but to finally give him the answer he deserves, even if it's her last act. Therefore, will the kingdom pay the price for their ancient fear, or face the wrath of the monster they created? The clock is ticking, and the fate of Aridia rests on a single act of royal sacrifice. The full moon rises in 30 days, and the Night King is waiting.
The question remains, what would you sacrifice to save your people? Would you offer yourself to the one you betrayed, knowing there would be no mercy, no escape, only justice? Or would you fight the Night King for the small chance of survival, knowing that victory is impossible and defeat means the extinction of everything you've ever known? The Night King sits on his throne of petrified wood, wrapped in the tattered shroud that was meant for his coronation, waiting for the kingdom to make its choice. He has power. He has an army. He has 30 years of rage, fueling his every decision. But does he have something else? Buried beneath the anger and the pain, does the abandoned child still exist? Could a mother's genuine apology touch something in him that the forest couldn't destroy? Or has the boy who was thrown away become something so far beyond human compassion that mercy is no longer possible? The answer lies in the clearing, in the heart of the evil forest, where a king of monsters waits for a kingdom of cowards to finally face their sins. If this story of prophecy, revenge, and impossible choices gave you chills, hit that subscribe button. Moonlit Passions brings you powerful stories like this every week. Comment below. Would you sacrifice yourself for your kingdom, or would you find another way? Let me know what you think the Night King should do when his family comes crawling back.